Ikan, or at least that's how I think you pronounce it, commonly known in the West as Monster Island. Now this is a movie from Singapore, filmed in Indonesia, and it's about Japanese and English characters. So there you go. Now, this is a story set in World War II, and we have this prison ship, a Japanese prison ship going back to Japan, carrying POWs, and it is attacked and ultimately sank. And we have these two survivors, one of which is an English POW, and he is chained up to actually a Japanese prisoner who has been tortured and held captive by his own people for reasons. And they are chained up together and managed to kind of jump off the prison boat just in time and end up on this kind of desert island. And, you know, they're initially at odds because they are on opposite sides of the war, but they soon learn to work together to try and overcome a common enemy in the form of this creature, this kind of Gillman style aquatic kind of humanoid from the deep, you might say, that is intent on killing them. What will happen? You will have to watch the movie and find out. So the concept of two enemies kind of working together to overcome a common enemy, if you like, is you know, a story that stems from World War II. And there have been a couple of kind of science fiction, fantasy iterations of this story. So here is the latest one. So let's talk about it. What do we think? So this is an interesting movie in the fact that it's partially spoken English and partially spoken in Japanese, and neither of our characters can understand the other one. So yeah, it's a mix of different kind of languages. But it kind of gives it this, level of unknown, if you like, because if you're English speaking like me, you kind of understanding what our English character is saying and understand that he can't understand the Japanese character. So you're there with him in that kind of level of disconnect. So it's quite fun, and that we have this kind of bond between these two characters, but it's never like overdone. We don't have one learning Japanese or the Japanese guy learning English and stuff. They have to communicate with gesture and stuff like that. So these two characters, their kind of relationship and how it changes through the movie, to me feels very kind of naturalistic. And although they are initially starting at odds, they understand that they pretty much have to work together and out of necessity. And then as the film goes on, they are forming a genuine bond and kind of becoming friends and things like that. So I really have to say, I think the character work here is very strong, and it's a small cast. We get a smattering of supporting characters, mainly kind of other kind of Japanese soldiers that kind of show up through the movie, but they're small roles, and because the time is spent largely with our two central characters, I do feel you have that kind of feeling of these two guys kind of bonding, and they're out of necessity maybe, but nonetheless you do feel a genuine sense of kinship kind of between them, and that I kind of quite liked. And I thought the acting was solid from both these kind of actors here. I think they did a great job of this kind of interesting sort of dynamic here. I think this island that it kind of takes place on, obviously it was filmed in Indonesia, as I say. It looks suitably tropical and beautiful to look at, but obviously deadly in the circumstances of this movie. So you have this kind of juxtaposition of all this kind of beautiful landscapes and kind of lush kind of jungle and desert areas and sort of coastal areas and things, but they are stranded. They have to think about, you know, fresh water, you know, food, and obviously this kind of creature that is hunting them. So let's talk about this creature. It's a practically realised man in a suit, obviously taking cues from the likes of Creature from the Black Lagoon. You'll be reminded of things like, as I say, humanoids from the deep and stuff as well. You know, it looks pretty cool, I've got to say, practically realised with articulated sort of jaw and things like that. And he's depicted as extremely powerful. In actual fact, obviously, you know, we see a fight between this creature and a crocodile. And it's a very, very resilient creature, and it has its own motivations, and it's hinted at to be, you know, not completely unintelligent. It seems to be able to take care of its own wounds, and you even get a touch of sympathy for this kind of creature, you know, as well. I think on a technical basis, for the most part, there's one or two elements where you'll think, look, that looks a bit green screen, but for the most part, I do think the movie's filmed very well. You know, it's some great cinematography, camera composition, things like that. Great sound design in this movie. So it's very adept, you know, at kind of sucking you into this kind of story and stuff, even though it's not a complicated story, and it is a story we have seen before. But nonetheless, I do think it makes for a very kind of compelling sort of survival horror movie, where you do genuinely feel like these guys really are, you know, in a problem sort of situation, even without the monster, you know. But then you have this monster to it as well, and you know, they really do seem a very difficult situation to be in. It doesn't work. For the most part, I think the technical elements are very strong. There's one or two places where, like I've said, you'll see a little bit of kind of like green screen. I think maybe there is, the editing room was a little bit, to me, the editing, there's a few like overly quick edits where I feel it's a little distracting at times, where you know, it's kind of like having had this, I think it's meant to be like this confusion sort of style of sequences where we have these extremely quick edits and stuff, but you know, it's a little nauseating, I have to be honest with you, at times. That's all the issues I have on a technical element. The only other issues I have really with this movie is about the actual creature itself. So for two things I'd say about it, the suit, I think, especially if you're looking at the still picture, it looks pretty cool. You know, it's a pretty cool looking suit. When it's moving around, it does look like a guy in a suit, admittedly. It feels a little clumsy at times. You know, it doesn't have a huge amount of finesse. Also, it appears aquatic, but we only ever really see it once or twice in water. For the most part, it seems to be on land, whilst it clearly looks like an aquatic creature. So, you know, obviously aquatic creatures, you know, obviously we talked about a crocodile. You know, they can survive perfectly fine on land, a lot of them. But to me, you know, it appears to be more aquatic than it is like terrestrial, if that makes sense. The other thing is as well, is this movie's creature is resilient. Very resilient. I would argue too resilient. This creature takes a hell of a lot of punishment. You know, through the movie, it goes through so many different sort of types of wounds, fights, damage. No living creature would be able to survive all this, fantasy or not. It just takes up so much punishment. I actually think it's a little bit silly how much punishment this creature can actually take and still seem to function pretty well. So, yeah. Maybe they should have had multiple creatures to kind of like to up the threat level rather than having a seemingly unkillable creature. You know, so that's maybe the creature wasn't as kind of as well realised as perhaps it could have been. And I guess, like I've said, this story is not an original one. It is one that you've seen before, or at least you may well have done. But overall, it is a good story. You know, a tale of friendship and overcoming the odds. And it is, you know, it's an engaging story with good characters, well acted, and you know, the creature has its flaws, I would say, but it's still a kind of a fun creature feature. I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Please do let me know what your thoughts are, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.